Well, joining me now to delve into the results in a little bit more detail are a number of people from around the world. John Gazima, who's the Executive Chairman of BAV Consulting, Eduardo, who is the Managing Director of Brand Analytics, and Doreen Wang from Beijing, who is the Director of Millward Brown offices in China. Well, first of all, thank you all very much for joining. I'd like to start really with a general overview. We've seen in this year's rankings the total valuation of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands pretty much static year on year at about 0.3% of an increase. A lot of that staticness has really come from the fast-growing markets where we've seen a decline in the overall rate of growth of some of the Brazilian and Chinese brands. Eduardo, let's start with you. What are the main factors this year that have caused Brazilian brands to overall decline in value?
Okay, hi David. Something very important to highlight is that in 2011 we saw a huge growth in the total value of the top 50 Brazilian brands. The top 50 Brazilian brands grow almost 50% in 2011. And in 2012, they declined 23%. What happened in reality is that last year, we grew a lot. And now there is a lot of expectation about our economy, about our brands. And at the end, due to all financial crises, due to all capital markets problems, we do have some problems in our brands.
Thanks very much. I think that puts that into context. Doreen Wang, we've seen the latest 5-year Chinese economic plan, and that's put quite a lot of emphasis on Chinese companies to grow both their business and their brand out of China. We've got a new political leadership taking place across China over the next few months. What challenges do you see from a brand perspective of Chinese companies who are clearly large in China becoming big global brands?
David, and as we see in the BrandZ Top 100 brand, there are 13 Chinese brands in the list in this year, 2012. So that's very exciting. But still, and we see two groups of brands. One is the state-owned enterprise, and the other are the private Chinese brands. And those are the brands who have experienced faster growing in their brand value over the past few years. And for the Chinese brands overall, the key challenge, and there are two major key challenges, and one is Chinese brands still lack of a meaningful differentiator, and even in the domestic market in China. And the number two is still, and during the globalization of Chinese brands, and the key challenge is our brand awareness overseas is still very, very low. In the recent survey, it showed that 83% of consumers in the Western market cannot even name any of the Chinese brands. Although there are these 13 Chinese brands in the BrandZ Top 100, but it's still their success is mainly coming from the domestic market.
And John Gazima, when you walk down Fifth Avenue, as you probably do pretty much every day of the week, you see a whole host of brands from around the world. Can you see a Chinese brand on Fifth Avenue soon?
Oh, absolutely, David. I mean, I think Dory hit it really well when she said that, you know, this ascendancy of Chinese brands has been one of the major trends in marketing and branding over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, there's incredible growth in China, and both state-owned as well as private brands are ascending in their importance. I think the big challenge, though, as Dory said, is really awareness. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing in our data as well on the BAV side is that this lack of awareness and this lack of differentiation is really creating sort of a gap between people in an era where they've got less money to spend and they're going to be more careful with their consumption.
And Eduardo, do you see a similar situation with Brazilian and Latin American brands?
Yes, and I could group also in both groups that Doreen said. The state-owned company, which is Petrobras, Banco do Brasil, the public sector. Okay, and for both cases, okay, I need to agree with John in how to differentiate in a global context. And Itaú, Bradesco, a lot of Brazilian banks, Skol, Brahma, a lot of beers companies, I think that face in the same situation, the same context.
So moving on to looking at some of the differences we're seeing in increasing in values of some of the sectors. There are two sectors that stand out the most in terms of the increase of brand value, both at running at a 13% year-on-year increase, the luxury sector and the fast food sector. John Gazima, what observations can we make about the fast growth of two very different sectors?
I think you can call this the cheeseburger and handbags scenario of 2012. I think really what you're seeing, David, is a perfect example of a bifurcation of markets and also a maturing of consumers. Before the financial crisis, there was, I think a strong emphasis on needing to have the best in everything and excessive spending, debt-fueled consumption that drove about and contributed to a lot of the problems that we had over the last 3 or 4 years. One of the things that we saw in our data coming out of the global financial crisis was one of the fastest growing returning categories was luxury. And as you go into the data, what you start to see is that people are actually spending strategically in categories they value and in brands that they admire.
Doreen Wang, status has always been seen as a bit of a weapon in China and luxury brands as tremendous ammunition. Are we seeing at all a change in the way in which Chinese consumers view the luxury market?
The luxury market in China has been growing very fast over the past decade, and China has become the second largest luxury market. Still the demand for luxury goods in China has been keeping growing, and we have but the key observation is still lots of Chinese consumers are making the final purchase overseas, and they are travel to Europe and America and to make this final purchase. So that is one important trend, and the other is but the domestic sales, the domestic purchase is also catching up. And for Louis Vuitton and Chanel and Gucci, and they start to enjoy more and more like domestic and sales within China and to Chinese consumers, especially to the lower tier consumers.
So the message for luxury brands out of China is, I suppose, to make sure you've got good Chinese-speaking sales staff in your store. So Doreen, we've got a luxury Chinese brand entered the top 100 most valuable global brands for the very first time.
Yeah, and this year is very exciting to see Moutai is in the list, and it's the only Chinese luxury brand. It's a white alcohol Baijiu brand. This brand has been 300, 400 years old in China, but it's never looked old to Chinese consumers. It's keeping modernized its brand image and keeping this created the high level of relevance with not only the senior citizens, but also like young people. So that is a very outstanding brand and has achieved this high value this year. So it's a very, very good result to see.
Well, I've had several Moutai hangovers in my travels in China, and it's very nice to see them now on the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global list. Do we see the luxury market growing significantly in Latin America?
I think that in all Latin America, I could see a great development of this market. Okay, first due to the accession of the new riches. Okay, the new riches both in Brazil and in Latin America, in Colombia.
Well, that deals with the luxury part of the dichotomy and the bifurcation. What about the fast food element of it?
Well, I think here in the U.S., the fast food quick service category is also, a reflection of today's times, and people are being more sensible and practical. But I also think you have to look at the success of particularly American fast food overseas.
So, Doreen, do we see brands like KFC continuing to increase at the rate that they have done in China?
KFC's expansion in China has been happening over the past 10, 15 years. And this expansion has been quite significant, especially in the recent few years. So it's not only in the top tier city like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and getting the deeper and deeper penetration and to like tier 4, tier 5, and even some villages and very small towns. And probably you notice and like brands like KFC and their recent communication and on TV has been quite focused on their commitment to China and commitment to Chinese consumers, and which is trying to drive this emotional attachment with consumers in the emerging markets.
John Gazima, we've talked quite a lot about trust and the changing nature of trust. Clearly, one of the biggest building blocks for brands, we see that from our BrandZ data, you see it from the BAV data perspective, is the notion of trust. How do you think trust is holding up in an environment where, to be honest, most consumers trust more their contemporaries through social networking sites than they do big international global brands?
Yeah, you know, David, it's really interesting. We looked both at the BAV data and the BrandZ data, and across the spectrum of both of the studies, what you start to see is sort of one common theme, which is that trust is the new black. I mean, trust is really in style today, and I think it's a definition really of sort of a changing landscape where there's high degrees of cynicism really sorted with easy access to social media, which means that anyone in a nanosecond can figure out whether or not you're supporting your claims or delivering on your customer service.
And here, Doreen, I think we see quite a bit of difference between developed markets and fast-growing markets like China in terms of the relationship that consumers have with the brands and the trust that they have with them.
And the trust in China have some special meanings, and actually trust is a very important driver and to bond with consumers. As we all know, and China is facing some severe challenge on food safety, and this is the big concern for almost 80 or 90% of Chinese consumers. So food safety, information safety, and these are very important challenges and facing the brands and to be successful in China. So trust for food sector, for FMCG, and also for banking sector, that means, and you can really deliver this safety and the trust and healthy products and to your consumers.
One of the trends that we're seeing right across the world, and maybe even more with more veracity in fast-growing markets, is how mobile and how social we're all being as consumers. What impact, John, is that having for brands?
So I think every marketer has to be thinking about the trinity of social, mobile, and gaming, because they're becoming so pervasive in culture today. Facebook's recent acquisition of Instagram for $1 billion, the fact that Facebook today is the size of the entire internet in 2004 is just speaking to sort of this massive build in penetration. But I think the thing that really is overlooked and is becoming increasingly important for brands is the potential for gaming. And when you think about gaming, you think of some young kids somewhere playing World of Warcraft, when in fact today the average gamer is more likely to be an adult woman. In fact, they're 3 times more likely than a young male to be a gamer, courtesy of Zynga, PopCap, and all the other games that are emerging. So one of the things I think brands are doing is they're starting to build into this gaming overlay a way to engage consumers, to reward them, whether through check-ins at Foursquare or using other sort of devices through Scavenger and other ways to sort of create and desired consumer behavior.
In the mobile space, Eduardo, I think Brazil has more mobile subscribers than it does have population. What impact is mobile having for the growth of brands in Brazil?
We have 108 million of population, so which is more than 2 mobile per inhabitant. And this is something that's really incredible in Brazil. And this is a phenomenon, and this provides a lot of accessibility for information, and this creates a good environment for create brands in this digital environment.
Doreen Wang, in China, it's probably one of the most socially networked countries on earth. What do you see the implications for the digital world that we are clearly moving into has for Chinese brands.
Yep, and social and mobile and the overall digital are providing many, many opportunities and for new brands. So that is the equal opportunity for brands from different country of origin. So, and to grasp this opportunity, and many Chinese brands are working very hard and to catch the wave. And if you think about the most successful social brand in China, it's not Facebook. We don't have Facebook, and but we have Sina Weibo, and Sina's brand value growth over the past year is 240% the value growth. So think about that brand. It used to be only perceived as a very traditional and a formal website to search news, but right now is for the consumers and few is so connected with the brand. It's the platform to talk with their friends.
Well, Dorian, why don't we take a much closer look at Sina Weibo? Sina is an online media company principally known for its Chinese language information and entertainment site. Not only is it attractive to Chinese consumers inside China, but also to Chinese speakers in Taipei, in Hong Kong, and in North America. Sina also launched and owns the immensely popular micro-blogging site Weibo. It also operates in the business of mobile value-added services, offering ringtones, games and other applications. Sina is traded on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. And as an example of how established, valuable Western brands are looking towards Chinese brands, in 2010, Microsoft established an alliance with Sina.com for MSN to integrate their online services. Well, for the very first time in the history of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands, we have an African brand in the ranking. John Gazima, what does that say to you about Africa's place in the emerging markets?
It's incredibly exciting. I think, you know, the most hopeful aspirations I think all of us have is that, you know, Africa is going to be the next Asia, and you're going to see tremendous emergence in these brands and these sectors. Our team was recently in Nairobi just about 3 weeks ago doing research on a new book that we're working on, and we were just amazed at the high levels of entrepreneurialism, the exciting brands there from, you know, iHub and all the work that's happening there onto Safari.com and M-Pesa. It's just a really, I think, incredibly exciting time for Africa, and to see how these brands now get their time to take on the world stage.
Well, African brands might be a new story for the developed markets, but of course China and Latin America have been looking at Africa very closely over the past 5 or 6 years and investing substantially in the growth of Africa. Dorian, what do you see from an African perspective in China?
African market has been perceived as strategically important and for Chinese brands. And African market and the Middle East market, so those are many countries in those markets have long-term and a strong relationship with China. So in the Chinese brands globalization process, and African market and Middle East are usually perceived as strategically important. And also those are the market for Chinese brands that have some opportunity to build some premium or lifestyle type of brand, rather than in the Western market is still like value for money and very, very basic.
So you can see that premiumization of Chinese brands having a greater impact in the short term in Africa than they would necessarily have in more developed markets.
Absolutely. So some top tier Chinese brands have been quite focused their strategy in African countries like Nigeria and South Africa, and those are the markets and they put at a higher priority. Is mainly for the heritage of Chinese brands have been accumulated over the years.
And from a Brazilian and Latin American perspective, Africa has been on the agenda for quite some time.
Particularly in Brazil, okay, we have two companies that are investing quite a lot in Africa. One is Vale, which is one of the 10 most valuable brands in Brazil. Vale is a mining company, and Petrobras, who is in the ranking, it's one of the 100 top 100 most valuable brands, and they are investing quite a lot in Africa.
Well, let's move to the future, and if you all had a working crystal ball, what future do you see for brands? And in particular, if there was just one thing that you would advise people to do in terms of what they concentrate on to increase and develop their overall brand value? John.
David, John Kenneth Galbraith said the only value of economic forecasting is to render astrology credible. And so I say that with humility about the future, because if I knew that, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here. But I do think one of the really interesting and important trends that we've seen out of the BAV data is this shift to more values-led consumerism. We found in our data that 72% of people throughout many of the major developed markets were looking for brands and companies whose values aligned with their own. And those values really are sort of more common sense values. They're things like authenticity, trust, respect, dignity. And I think that has a big implication on marketing. I think marketing is shifting from moving from words to action. That's going to be very much an imperative of marketing to sort of move out of itself being a department that really sells into sort of a core function in the enterprise to really deliver on the promises of brands so that they truly have that authenticity that the world market is now seeking.
Well, in fact, we have a joint article by John and myself in the report for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands that touches on that very subject. So an unashamable plug for that, which you can download from the BrandZ website as soon as this web seminar is over.
In my crystal ball, and I would like to see the value of Chinese brands and keep growing and over the next few years. But the very important driver for this growth, and it's a must-win battle, is for Chinese brand to really develop some meaningful differentiator. And the digital wave is creating many very valuable and quite great brand. For example, like Tencent and Baidu, and right now those digital brands have already entered the top 100 BrandZ ranking. And in the next few years, we would probably see more digital brands of such type.
I think for America, I think the key challenge is for these brands to become more global, to think more global, and to structure their operation, their teams as a global company.
Well, thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts and observations and insights with us. John, Doreen and Eduardo, thanks very much for being with us.